Hello friends, this is Growl. In this video I'm going to go over a dungeon run I did on the beta with my friends and give some feedback on what I think about healing Shadowlands dungeons as a whole. It's going to be a bit more of a freeform and relaxed video. I want to talk about my overall thoughts on the dungeons, some specific thoughts about this dungeon, Mists of Tyrna Scythe, and also maybe a bit of strategy along the way. I think there's good and bad stuff about the dungeons so far. One of the good things, for sure, no matter what, is that everything is new. The game is going to be so fun on release. Even if there are problems with the game, or people don't like the covenants, or they think they're boring, the first few months are going to be so fun. I can't wait to play with people that are just coming back and learning all the dungeons, especially getting to push the dungeons to their limits and see what you can get away with. It's always fun to learn strategies and see, like, oh, another group is doing this and fighting this mob, and I didn't even think that was a viable strategy. Another thing that's good is I feel like there's a lot more healing to do. In BFA, it feels like there's a lot of long stretches in dungeons where all the damage can be mitigated or avoided. As a healer, sometimes I feel like useless, and there would be times where I die in a boss fight or a trash pack, and my team lives for like 3 minutes or something, and I just get the feeling, why am I even here? In Shadowlands, I feel like a lot more of the encounters have a lot more unavoidable damage going out. It might seem bad or scary, but from a healer perspective, I think I actually want that. It makes the game more fun. I actually get to be a good healer instead of just, you know, how much damage am I doing overall in a dungeon to speed things up since I don't need to be healing. Sometimes it can feel like that way in like Siege of Borealis or Shrine in BFA. One thing that's not good, though, is I feel like the variety of the dungeons is going to feel pretty bad at first. If you're playing casually, it might not be so bad if you're only doing, you know, a couple dungeons a week. But for someone like me who nerds out and plays all these things with a try-hard squad, like every day, I'm worried we're going to get sick of them really fast. Keep in mind the dungeon balance at the beginning of the expansion can be a bit off. So, like, let's say there's only 1 or 2 dungeons that are really much harder or buggy. It'll limit replayability a lot. Let's say you have the same group of friends, even just after like a day or two of running dungeons, you'll probably end up with I just died there to the cast. You'll end up with keystones for dungeons that you don't want pretty early. At least in Battle for Azeroth right now, there's 12 different ones, and I hope that they start adding dungeons to Shadowlands as well. I mean, I know they will, but I want them as soon as possible. It took them so long to add in the Mechagon ones. This pack right here is a good example of the unavoidable damage. These guys have a thrash cast that they do at 50%, where it's just like a big tantrum. This is a really fun pack to fight because you can choose what you want to do. So the general strategy is how we mark this one with Skull, and then we get that one to 50 first, and it thrashes, so it can be a bit more manageable. But another option is you could get both of them at 50 at the same time, and it would speed things up a bit. And then if you just have like really big defensives, maybe like a DK AMZ. So I really love a pack like this that not only has a lot of stuff to heal as a healer, but also gives you a little bit of decision making as to how you handle it. Another problem with me about these dungeons, though, is they're like a bit too linear. I understand why some of them can and should be linear, but I would like a bit more variety, room for creativity. This is the seasonal affix Prideful. I'm sure you've seen it if you've watched some of my other videos, but the gist of it is it has this one mechanic where it puts orbs on one player that shoot out and you sort of have to dodge them. And other than that, it just continuously pulses AoE. You can see the stacks above the nameplate that show how much damage it's doing. This is actually really, really fun as a healer. This is one of my favorite affixes, so I know I'm going to enjoy Season 1. I hope this thing is hard. I hope this has a lot of healing required. You can see that even on a 15 level right now, I'm struggling a bit with keeping everyone alive. I didn't have a major cooldown, and once it gets to above 20 stacks, it can hurt really, really bad. Oh, so I was talking about the dungeons being linear. The biggest problem for me about linear dungeons, it's not just the fact that they're like less exciting or less replayable, but in my opinion, I think it promotes the idea of meta a lot more. I don't think people realize this, but if there's a wide open dungeon with like tons of different packs and you can decide what to do, you have a lot more room to use different class abilities and strengths and like be creative. But when there's just one long straight line and one path, yeah, it's a bit more simple and easy for beginners. But what happens is then you just say, well, let's just bring the highest DPS class, and then you need a rogue to skip, right? Because you can't skip stuff because it's a straight line. So I actually think that open-ended dungeons are better for the better for the meta as a whole. Like, you can definitely have good linear dungeons, but I think I'd like to see most of them be a bit more exploratory and open. Anyway, I've just been kind of rambling a little bit. So this is the first boss. There's 3 boss and miss. This one I think is one of the least interesting in terms of healing. There's a little bit going on. It's sort of like a council fight, except for there's not a lot of damage. Like, you can see I'm doing a little bit of healing, but barely more than our tank, and it's mainly a matter of just you DPS the tree down, and then eventually you can damage the guy. So there's this weird unavoidable fear. I don't know exactly if they figured out what they want with this dungeon. I was a bit greedy with my Convoke there. Usually if that fear goes out, it's sort of like a soft enrage. I probably could have kept our hunter alive there. But yeah, I'm not sure about this boss. I really, really like the other bosses in this instance, though, so 2 out of 3, I'm not going to complain. Yeah, so it's essentially like a council fight where you just have to kill the tree and then you can kill the other guy. I don't know what exactly is going on. I'm not good with lore. If you came here for lore advice or explanations, you may be in the wrong place. You'll notice when I'm playing beta, I almost never write bug reports or anything, but keep in mind I've been playing for several months now and I've written a lot of stuff, so sometimes people watch my videos or stream and they're like, hey, you didn't report that. It's like, well, I've reported bugs many times, most of them. So this is what I think is the most fun mechanic minigame sort of thing in any dungeon I've played so far. So the way this works is it reminds me a lot of the Lost Woods in Zelda. There are 4 different symbols. Each symbol has 3 attributes, whether or not it's filled in, whether or not it has a circle, and if it's a flower or a leaf. And one of those attributes is going to be different. And so the goal is you need to find which attribute is different on the symbol, and then that will show you the way. And if you go the wrong way, it will teleport you back to the beginning. And I have so much fun with this. So you can see the way I do it is, since I'm a healer and my tank is pretty durable, I don't need to do too much healing. I actually go through and I look at all the symbols and I essentially play the game myself and figure out which way it is to go. I'll definitely come out with a video explaining these more. I think this was the only one with the flower, so I'm showing the way here. This is an example of a linear dungeon gone right. This is very linear. You have absolutely no choice as to what you pull here, but you have a lot of, like, it deviates from time to time when you play it, and overall it just seems fun. I could see this getting boring, or another thing is if you have some sort of add-on that helps you with it. To be honest, the more I think about it, there's almost certainly going to be an add-on that just does it for you, which is unfortunate, but this is very, very cool. And they try and put things like this into dungeons quite often, and usually I don't like them, but this was really, really well done. So one of the things I think is cool about healing, you don't really see it in any given dungeon run, but I think that gearing and overall just talent selection is a lot more fun. As a DPS player, it feels like you are limited by the damage. You can't really make a lot of choices, even if you think something is going to be more fun, just because well, if this does more damage, you should probably take it. Especially on single targets, it's essentially just run a simulation and then you're like, oh, this is the highest damage, now I run this always. There's some deviation depending on what class you're playing, but as a healer, I feel like I get a lot more freedom. Healing dungeons is way less about maximizing your healing throughput and more just about dealing with every scenario. It's a little annoying that you can't swap the Covenant abilities. That would be more customization, but you have legendary items and talents and trinkets and everything else to switch anyway, so it'll still be pretty fun as healers. I think gearing is quite boring in WoW and probably lost in a lot of characters, or rather a lot of specs, in terms of you just sim or you follow a guide. But I think healers still sort of have that fun decision making going on with the way that they gear. I've been alternating between the Life Bloom Legendary and the Swiftmend one that extends your HOTS. Both of them alter your rotation a bit, and they're really, really fun to use. I worry a little bit about classes that don't really have that option to switch between legendaries, and if you're stuck for one with every situation, especially one that doesn't change your rotation. The Shadow Word Death legendary for Disc Priest was really fun for me, but they recently nerfed it, and now I found myself using the Power Word Shield Reflect damage one. And as much as that is like pretty powerful and is doing decent damage, it's just not that fun to use because you don't really have to think about what you're doing. Maybe you prioritize using Power Word Shield a little bit compared to another rotation, but so yeah, this is a really great area. It's got a lot of different mechanics going on. You can't always see them right away, but once you heal it, you'll notice them. There's some dispels that are really, really nasty if you don't get them quick as a healer. You can see that sort of machine gun frontal thing going on that you need to dodge. So it's not like there's nothing. It does sort of look like there's nothing. There's maybe a little bit, like this area is a little bit too easy, but keep in mind too that eventually it's going to get to the point where everything is pretty challenging. So now we're on Mistcaller. I think this is my favorite boss. This is one of my favorite bosses in Shadowlands right now. This is a good mix of something that's interesting, but not necessarily that random, or, you know, it's not like it's a good way to shift things up, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like you get lucky or unlucky. So it spawns these foxes that are really, really nasty, or these Vulpin or whatever. And you do mostly just damaging the boss and simple dodges, but then you get this guessing game, if you will, again, where you have to find the wrong symbol. However, this time it's just pulsing damage, and it gets higher and higher with each one. So there's a lot going on here. Like, as a healer, I want to help my team get the wrong one down, but at the same time, you can see we're just getting blasted here. There are 3 different phases in total like this, so as a healer, you know ahead of time how you manage out your cooldowns. I really like phases that are HP % based, because you don't have to worry as much about, I don't want to say thinking on the fly, but you can plan things out and be a bit more methodical like that. Like, so essentially for this one, my idea was just, I assume everyone's going to have their defensives on the first one, and then I'm not going to use a big cooldown, and then that leaves me with Tranquility and Convoke for the next 2. So like this one right here, I think I use my Tranquility here, even though I was pretty well prepared for it. Yeah, so I just make sure I dodge stuff before I throw that out, even though I probably should be using Wild Growth before I Trank. Managing a solid rotation can be kind of hard as a healer. Like, I watch back myself a lot, and I see silly mistakes that I make. And I think it's because as a healer, you have to have quite a bit more awareness to what's going on around you than other classes. I'm not saying that you have to have a bigger brain or whatever, because it's sort of the opposite. You're less rotation dependent, like I said. It's more just about dealing with situations, but sometimes when there's a lot of stuff going on, it just ends up to you being on autopilot and not really thinking about what's happening. And if you don't have a really solid rotational thing, or like a basis, I guess, if you will, then it can lead to some mistakes. So yeah, that's definitely a healer thing where I watch back and I see myself like, oh, what am I doing? A really common one is anytime you want to do big healing as a druid, you want to have those hots up first because of your mastery. Even without a whole lot of mastery, it still makes a pretty big difference when you have those big heals like Swift Mend or Tranquility. And you know, when I watch myself use a trank and I have Wild Growth available, I'm not even using it. It's like kind of weird. One thing that I get asked a lot about, sorry, this is what happens when I do freeform, guys, is my party frames, my UI and stuff like that. I think the most important thing for healers is to be able to see everything that you need to see. Whether it's like a buff or a debuff or an incoming spell or whatever, you need to have it visible, and visibility can be different for different people. Some people like just bars on the screen, other people want icons or sounds or whatever. I think a good practice is to have a notepad file open, or even just like a piece of paper or anything while you're playing. And then if you ever get caught off guard by something that you didn't see coming, just write it down. And then later on, you'll have this list of just a couple things that you didn't realize, and you can figure out how to get it more visible later. It definitely leads to a bit of UI clutter. Like I have probably a little bit more things on the middle of my screen than most people do, but I think the visibility that you lose from the busyness helps, in my case at least. It isn't just useful for dungeons either. I know this is like mainly supposed to be about dungeon healing, but it's really good for PvP and raid as well. I share my UI, but I don't really recommend copying it unless you are going to spend time like learning how to do all that stuff. You need to know how it works so that if you run into that inevitable scenario where you need to make something more or less visible, you know how to do it right away. This is, I think, the funnest area of Mist. It's much less linear. There's lots of different paths you can go. There are pretty big pulls, so you can do some big damage. You can see us using this prideful buff and running into this pack, which was really, really cool. You can choose to pull a lot of stuff in here or a little. In general, I think all the areas are really good in Mist. I think the first sort of area and the first boss is a little bit weaker, but I have a lot of fun healing this dungeon. Overall, I have a lot of fun healing in Shadowlands. I know for sure it's going to be fun for a while. I can see it getting old, but at the same time, Blizzard is good at coming out with updates and patches and adding stuff, so I'm really excited for Shadowlands and making guides and stuff. One thing that's a little bit annoying news that just came out recently is that item level from dungeon gear is going to be pretty low compared to raid. Right now it's looking like no matter how high of a dungeon you do in Mythic Plus, it's going to be worse than heroic raid. And you don't even really need to do dungeons anymore because there's no dungeon weekly chest. It's just like a shared weekly chest. I don't really want to go into it that much in this video, but it means that you have to raid to get the best gear, even if you're a top-end Arena or Mythic Plus player. To me, it doesn't matter too much because I like raiding and Mythic progging too, but it can be frustrating for some people. Let's say you don't have as much time and you really enjoy your dungeon group with your friends, but you don't have the time or social skills or whatever to try and get a guild together and raid every week to get gear. You almost are at the point where you're kind of griefing your friends if your gear is going to be significantly behind, even if you guys are pretty well coordinated and you're doing like high up dungeons. Oh no, did we die here? This looks like a scary pull. I'm worried that I picked a video that we die to do a commentary. I thought I remember this one being clean. I guess I have Trank and Convoke here, so it should be fine. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to playing Shadowlands. I don't know. I don't think I would have as much fun in dungeons if I wasn't playing a healer. I think healers are really, really fun. And it's a pretty unique experience. The one problem with healing is I think it's a lot of people say it's hard, but it is less impactful and less stressful, I guess, than tanking. So you don't really have that tanking benefit. Like tanks sort of are special in that you have a much easier time finding a dungeon group and making your way around. But as healers, you still sort of, there's a lot more competition with healers, as you will. So we get this prideful buff and we shroud through this pack. There's not much stealth detection here, so you can kind of do what you want and move around. This is a cool use of the shroud. This boss is really, really cool as well. It was overtuned for a while, so it throws these acid expulsions on you, and what happens is the boss becomes smarter over time. And by smarter, I just mean it remembers which way you dodge, and it shoots it there too. So now watch this one. Instead of just one, it's going to shoot two at me. See how it shot one and then that other one behind because I dodged backwards? So the whole idea with this boss is not only do you dodge those swirlies, but you have to remember what way you're dodging in order to not dodge the second time. The biggest problem is that everybody's swirlies hit. So for example, I'm standing pretty far out so that I'm not affected by anyone else's dodging, but you can see our DK died there, probably because it wasn't even his, but it was someone else that was in melee that he had to get out of. So this is another good fight where you have this dodging mechanic, but at the same time, there's lots of stuff to do as a healer. You see I got hit by that one there. You have lots of stuff to do as a healer, so they have these consumption casts, which are similar to the phasing of the second boss as well, where it's just raid-wide damage. There's a lot more dodging going on here, and then as a fair response, there's also less damage going out. It's not a super big emergency that you throw out heals. At this point, I just abandon remembering which way that I dodge, because there's so many of them now. Maybe there'll be a good strategy in terms of how you remember which way, but usually by the time the boss starts getting low, you just abandon and you just get out as far as possible. You can see I'm just like out of here every time, and now I'm even spawning ones that are way over there. This is a really cool boss. It reminds me almost of a raid encounter in that as the boss goes on, it gets harder and harder and more hectic. Like you can see it spawns these infestors that mind control people. So our hunter is mind controlled here. There's just more and more ads spawning, but at this point we can't really deal with them. As a healer, I'm getting threat of them because no one's hitting them. This is something you have to get used to as a healer, definitely. I have a big cooldown and Convoke here saved sort of for this stressful moment. I think I actually clown it here, so I forget that we still have count to do. I forgot that we shrouded and skipped a bunch of stuff, and I actually tab out right here, and I'm just like, where's the chest? I think at some point I get made fun of by my group, and I kind of extend it and start griefing, and then I'm like, oh, I forgot we got a lot more mobs to do. This is not something I'm used to. It's definitely a bit harder playing in beta dungeons that I'm not, like, I don't know. It sounds silly. I'm gonna get a lot of comments like, oh, you're carried by your weak auras or your add-ons or UI or anything, but it's actually so much harder for me to play on beta than it is on live. I felt like playing in dungeons that I'm less familiar with made me relate a lot more to like everybody else, right? The average player, just because I'm so much less aware of what's going on. When you do the same dungeon like I do 100 times in a month, especially with the same players, it does like get a bit scripted. So I'm really excited for future dungeon guides to put out. I'm going to talk about a lot of this stuff, and I think it'll be a big help and give people an edge knowing like what's going on in these dungeons and what some of the harder parts are. I'm really excited, and my goal with Shadowlands and my content right now is to really help not just myself, but everybody watching hit the ground running and go into these dungeons and be able to progress to levels that they didn't think they would be able to, and just be like, wow, I didn't see this side of competitive dungeons, and I didn't see this way I could interact with my team. And I'm really hoping that everyone who has been following me and supporting me can get to a level that they didn't think they've gotten, because that's always so rewarding to hear as a creator, to have someone come and say, you know, I learned this from you, or I was able to do this. It's been real fun. I haven't mentioned it in any of my other videos, but I recently passed, I think, 22,000 subscribers. It's just insane. It's insane, and I haven't included it in many other things, but thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate the support. It's been so fun working on all this stuff and being able to get feedback and have people watch it and enjoy it. Either way, that was my more rambly overview of healing and Shadowlands and dungeons. I hope it was useful or at least entertaining for you. Thanks for watching. I plan on doing some more audio commentaries of Shadowlands once the game is released. Hopefully more higher key stuff with a lot more in-depth strategy. So don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this one. Happy keying.